All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus est. The Power Paradigm, written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. Toxic Masculinity Critique, a manual for seeing through the performance. I want to tell you about a city that murdered itself with kindness. Not with swords or famine, but with a single ceremony, a ritual so diabolical in its stupidity that future ages, if any remain, will weep that anyone called it progress. The city of Logos had one law older than its walls: the rope, not silk, not gold. A coarse iron-threaded tether that bound each citizen to duty, debt, family, and destination. It was the visible grammar of civilization.
And a girl named Winona decided it was oppression. She stood on the marble pedestal of discourse, clutching the shears she'd renamed empathy, and told the crowd that the rope was a lie told by the strong.
She cut the tether of the most capable citizen, not because he failed, but because his competence intimidated those who had. The crowd roared. They had been taught that burden was injustice and that exemption was freedom. No one asked the first question any serious person asks: freedom from what? And freedom for what? Here is the natural law they severed. Constraint is the architecture of liberty, not its enemy. The rope connected the anchor to the ship, the father to the child, the worker to the wage, the citizen to the city. To cut, it was not to liberate, but to set adrift. Strength was not stewardship anymore, it became bullying. Feeling became fact. Exemption became reward. Each inversion had a direction and a magnitude, a vector pulling the entire republic away from reality and toward the warm, sinking void of narrative. What follows is a precise audit of every one of those vectors. I will name each inversion, measure its force, expose its error, and prescribe the virtue it was designed to replace. The ropeless republic is not a fairy tale. It is a diagnosis delivered with the scalpel of someone who watched the ships collide and refuses to call the wreckage liberation. The foolish ideology expression. The belief that authority is a social construct imposed by the strong, and that true justice is achieved when the weak are exempt from the consequences of their own weakness. The event, the grand unbinding ceremony where the city of Logos abolished the tyranny of the rope, the physical tether that bound citizens to their duties, debts, and destinations, delirium that freedom is the absence of constraint, not the mastery of it. The fable, the ropeless republic, a fable of cut tethers and sinking ships. There was once a city called Logos, and it was a city that worked. Its harbor was full of ships tied fast to the docks by thick braided ropes. Its granaries were full because strong men carried the weight. Its children were fed because fathers were tethered to families, and families were tethered to law, and law was tethered to truth. No one pretended the ropes were comfortable. No one claimed the weight was light. But every citizen understood what every sailor has known since the first coracle touched the first sea. A ship without an anchor does not sail free. It drowns. The ropes were visible everywhere. They connected the worker to the wage, the father to the child, the promise to the performance, the duty to the dignity. They were not pretty, they chafed, they left calluses. but the city stood because the ropes held.
Into this city came young Dr. Winona. She was not large, she was not strong. She had never carried grain, nor docked a ship, nor tethered a goat. But she had a weapon sharper than any blade. She had a slogan.
And she had the amplifiers of discourse, the great brass horns that lined the marble pedestal at the city's center, which could make a whisper sound like a decree and a tantrum sound like a revelation.
Winona ascended the pedestal on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays were when the grain carriers were too tired to argue.
She pointed one pale finger at the thickest rope in the harbor, the one that bound the strongest citizen to his post. His name was Ardos. He carried the grain of the entire eastern quarter on his back, not because anyone forced him, but because he was the only man strong enough to bear it, and he knew that if he set it down, children would go hungry. He had carried it for 20 years. His spine was bent, his hands were stone. He did not complain, because complaint was not his language. Duty was.
Look at him, Winona said, and the amplifiers carried her voice across the harbor like a gull that had learned to lecture. Look at that man, chained. The crowd looked.
They saw Ardos, bent and sweating, the rope across his shoulder. Is he not oppressed? She asked, tilting her head with the practiced sorrow of someone who had never missed a meal. Is this not the tyranny of the rope?
The great fiction told by those who fear the fall. The rope is a lie. Ardos looked up. The rope holds the ship to the dock, he said. The rope holds you, Winona corrected. It binds you to a burden you never chose.
Duty is just fear in a suit. Now, Ardos was not a philosopher. He was a man who carried things.
And because he was not a philosopher, he did not realize that the crowd had already stopped listening to him and started listening to the amplifiers. And the amplifiers were tuned to Winona's frequency.
The crowd had been trained, you see. For a generation, the teachers in the marble schools had whispered that fatigue was not the sign of labor, but the symptom of injustice, that the rope was not a tool, but a weapon, that anyone who carried a burden was a victim, and anyone who imposed one was a tyrant. They had been taught a new grammar in which burden meant oppression, strength meant cruelty, and freedom meant the absence of anything that pulled.
So when Winona raised the shears of empathy, great golden shears, polished to a mirror shine, so that everyone who looked at them saw only their own sympathetic face reflected back, the crowd did not cheer for Ardos. They cheered for themselves. They cheered for the dream of standing upright without weight, of floating free of every rope that connected them to anything demanding. Today, Winona declared, we perform the grand unbinding.
Today, we abolish the tyranny of the rope. Today, freedom comes to Logos. She cut the rope. The first cut was Ardos's. The rope fell away from his shoulder, and for a moment, one perfect, weightless moment, he stood upright. He had not stood straight in 20 years. The crowd gasped at the sight. Tears streamed.
The amplifiers hummed with reverence. Winona smiled the smile of a child who has pulled a thread and does not yet know it is holding together a garment. It is wrong, Ardos said, but his voice had no amplifiers behind it. It was only the voice of a man, and the crowd had been taught that men's voices were the sound of the rope itself. Your pain is speaking, Winona said gently. Your conditioning, you have internalized your oppression.
Rest now. Someone else will carry the grain. No one carried the grain. The unbinding spread.
Winona and her disciples, the Compassionati, they called themselves, robed in empathy and armed with shears, moved through the city like a gentle, lethal wind.
They cut the rope that tethered the judges to the law, declaring that justice should flow from feeling, not precedent. They cut the rope that bound teachers to standards, declaring that excellence was a weapon used to shame the mediocre. They cut the rope that connected fathers to children, declaring that the household was a private tyranny and the state a more loving parent. With each cut, the crowd cheered. Cheering was the only rope they kept. The ships began to drift first. It was subtle. A merchant vessel slid 6 inches from the dock. No one noticed. Then a fishing boat floated into a grain barge. Then a grain barge spun into the seawall. The harbor master tried to retie a rope and was surrounded by the Compassionati, who chanted, "Tyrant, Tyrant until he dropped it. He had a family. He could not afford to be called a tyrant, so the ships drifted. The grain rotted next. Without Ardos and the other carriers, the sacks sat on the docks in the sun.
When the people complained, Winona ascended the pedestal and explained that the rotting grain was proof the old system had been broken all along. The rope never worked, she said. It only hid the rot.
The amplifiers agreed. The crowd nodded. They were hungry, but they were vindicated, and vindication tasted better than bread. The children wandered into the streets.
Their fathers had been unbound from the household, some by the shears, some by the courts that Winona's disciples had reshaped in their image, where a father's defense of himself was proof of his danger,
and his silence was proof of his guilt. The children stood in the roads, unmoored, and looked for someone to follow. The state offered them counselors. The counselors offered them feelings. The feelings offered them nothing to hold on to. Then came the arguments. With the ropes cut, there was no mechanism to settle disputes. When two citizens disagreed, they could not appeal to a shared standard because all standards had been cut as ropes. They could not appeal to law because law was a rope. They could not appeal to tradition because tradition was a rope. They could not appeal to the wisdom of the elders because the elders had been re-educated by the Compassionati, who taught that age was bias and experience was privilege. So they appealed to the only thing left, feeling. Whoever felt the most harmed won. Whoever expressed the most pain had the most authority. Pain became currency. Suffering became status. The city did not collapse in fire or war. It collapsed in competing accusations, each citizen out-victimizing the next, each injury demanding a tribunal, each tribunal demanding a new rule, and each new rule becoming a new rope, but a rope made not of hemp and duty, but of grievance and fear. These new ropes were worse. The old ropes had connected. The new ropes bound. The old rope said, you are tied to a duty, and the duty gives you purpose. The new rope said, you are tied to an accusation, and the accusation gives you guilt. You could choose to carry the old rope. You could not choose to escape the new one, because the new ropes were invisible, woven from whispered allegations and amplified panic, and to deny one was to prove it was real.
Winona was asked, in a rare moment when the amplifiers were turned low, why the city was hungry. The grain carriers are hoarding, she said. But there were no grain carriers. There was no grain.
Ardos watched from the edge of the city. He had been unbound as demanded. He had tried at first to carry the grain anyway, without the rope. But a man carrying weight without a tether, without a dock, without a system that recognizes his labor and connects it to a purpose, that man is not a carrier. He is a spectacle, and soon a spectacle becomes a target. The Compassionati pointed at him. Why does he carry when others cannot? Is he not shaming them? Is his strength not a form of violence? Ardos set the grain down not because he was lazy, because the city had made his strength illegal. He sat on the seawall and watched the ships collide. The storm came on a Sunday. It was not a great storm, not a hurricane, not a cataclysm. It was the kind of storm that came every season, the kind the city had weathered 100 times because the ropes held and the anchors bit and the men who knew the harbor pulled the ships tight and rowed it out. But the ropes were cut, the anchors were gone, the men had been excused, the ships smashed against each other in the harbor like teeth in a broken jaw, the seawall cracked, the unattended granaries flooded. The children in the streets had nowhere to run, because the households that would have sheltered them had been dismantled brick by brick in the name of liberation.
Winona stood on the pedestal, which was the highest point in the city and the only structure that had not been touched by the shears.
It was, after all, her rope, the rope of authority, of narrative, of amplified speech, and she had never thought to cut it. She watched the water rise and said into the amplifiers, this storm proves the old system failed. We need more unbinding. The rope of the weather itself must be cut. But the amplifiers had been drenched. They sparked, sputtered, and died.
And for the first time, the city heard Winona's real voice, small, thin, trembling, and realized it had been listening to an amplifier, not a prophet. Ardos walked through the wreckage after the storm. He found rope.
It was frayed, waterlogged, half-rotten. He picked it up. He tied one end to the seawall. He tied the other to a broken ship. It held. A boy, one of the unmoored children, watched him. "What are you doing?" the boy asked. "Tying a rope," Ardos said. "They said ropes are oppression." Ardos looked at the boy. He looked at the harbor, still littered with shattered wood.
He looked at the pedestal where Winona sat alone, hugging her golden shears, the only tether she had left. "They were wrong," Ardos said, "and you are hungry because they were wrong. Pass me that line."
The boy picked up the rope. It was rough. It chafed. He did not like it. But he held it because his hands were empty and the rope connected him to a man who knew what to do with it. And that was more than the Compassionati had ever offered. Together they began to retie the city. It was slow. It was painful. The calluses came back. The ropes chafed as they had always chafed. Not everyone wanted to be retied. Some preferred the drift, the weightlessness, the excuse that the storm was someone else's fault and the hunger was someone else's debt. They stood at the edges and accused Ardos of rebuilding the tyranny. They called the rope a shackle. They called the duty a sentence. They called the boy a traitor to liberation. But the boy was eating again, and Ardos was carrying, and the ships were docking. And the children were finding their fathers, or what was left of them, and the fathers were finding their children, or what was left of them, and the rope, rough, heavy, despised, indispensable rope, was pulled tight between them. Logos did not return to what it had been. Too much grain had rotted, too many ships had sunk, too many children had wandered too far. But the rope was back, and where the rope was, there was connection. And where there was connection, there was a future. As for young Dr.
Winona, she descended from the pedestal at last, shears in hand, and walked to the harbor. She watched Ardos and the boy working. She watched the rope bite into their hands.
She felt the wind on her face and the emptiness in her stomach. She looked at the shears. She looked at the rope. She set the shears down. She picked up the rope. It cut her palms. She bled. She held on the moral. When you cut the rope to free the ship, you do not liberate it. You condemn it to the storm. True freedom is not the absence of constraint, but the mastery of it. The rope is not the enemy. The rope is the only thing that keeps the city from the sea. Natural law origin point. Natural law dictates that power requires responsibility and liberty requires discipline. The rope is not merely a shackle, but a vector of connection. It connects the anchor to the ship, the father to the child, the worker to the wage, and the citizen to the city. To cut the rope is not to liberate, but to drift. The natural order is hierarchical and causal. Strength supports weakness, and in return, weakness yields obedience. When the tether is severed, the strong are no longer bound to serve the weak, and the weak are no longer bound to support the strong. The result is not utopia, but entropy, moral space vectors. The rope as oppression, from the rope as connection away from duty, toward entitlement, magnitude 9/10 error. It mistakes the mechanism of stability, constraint, for the source of suffering pain. It assumes that because the rope pulls, it hurts, ignoring that without the pull, the ship drifts into the void. Remedy, prudence, recognizing that constraints are the architecture of freedom. Strength as bullying, from strength as stewardship, away from competence, toward mediocrity. Magnitude 8/10 error. It pathologizes the natural hierarchy of ability. By labeling the strong as bullies for simply existing at a higher capacity, it incentivizes the strong to hide their power and the weak to demand compensation for their lack of it. Remedy, justice, giving each their due based on contribution and capacity, feeling as fact, from fact as foundation away from reality, toward narrative, magnitude 7/10. Error, Dr.
Winona argues that if the weak feel bound, they are bound. This replaces objective measurement, weight, distance, time with subjective experience. A rope that feels tight is still a rope. A ship that drifts is still lost.
Remedy, truth, the courage to accept reality regardless of comfort. Exemption as reward, from exemption as privilege away from merit, toward identity, magnitude 8/10. Error, the ceremony rewards the weak, not for overcoming their weakness, but for being weak. It inverts the moral economy. The burden of the strong becomes their sin, and the relief of the weak becomes their right. Remedy, Temperance, the mastery of desire over the demand for ease. The crowd as oracle, from the expert as guide away from knowledge toward consensus. Magnitude 6/10.
Error. The applause of the crowd validates Winona's cut, not because it was correct, but because it was popular. The many are not the wise, they are the numerous. Popularity is not a proxy for truth.
Remedy, wisdom, the discernment of truth from the noise of the multitude. Drift as freedom, from anchor as purpose away from direction. Toward chaos, magnitude 10/10. Error, the ultimate inversion. The state of being untethered is celebrated as liberty, but a ship without an anchor is not free. It is at the mercy of the storm. True freedom is the ability to choose one's burden, not the absence of all burden. Remedy, fortitude, the strength to hold one's ground against the current. Natural law vector audit, what the fable shows. A civilization is not a monument, it is a tether, a set of inherited, tested, load-bearing connections between cause and consequence, effort and reward, authority and responsibility, father and child, law and truth. The city of Logos worked because its ropes worked. The ropes chafed, all real constraints do, but they held. They held ships to docks, promises to performance, children to fathers, words to meanings.
Winona's revolution was not a revolution against power. It was a revolution against definition. She did not seize the granary. She redefined burden as oppression. She did not redistribute the grain.
She reclassified effort as injustice. Her weapon was not the shears, those were ceremonial. Her weapon was the redefinition. Once the crowd accepted her grammar, the logic followed automatically, and the rhetoric carried the rest. This is always the order of conquest. First the dictionary, then the syllogism, then the statute. The fable demonstrates that ideological destruction begins not with fire, but with equivocation. Call a rope a shackle long enough, and men will cut their own lifelines and thank you for the bleeding. Natural law as the origin point. Before we can measure how far a thing has fallen, we must establish where it stood. Natural law is not a preference. It is not a cultural artifact. It is the built-in grammar of reality itself, the proposition that beings have natures, natures have ends, and ends impose duties. A ship is built to sail. A sail is built to catch wind. A father is built to guide. A word is built to mean to act against the nature of a thing, is not to liberate it, but to destroy it. You do not free a ship by removing its anchor. You condemn it to the current. The origin point of moral measurement is this. What is the thing for? This is the question of telos, final causality. Aristotle identified it. Aquinas systematized it. Every civilization that endured has assumed it. And every ideology that destroys civilizations begins by denying it. The rope in the language of natural law is obligation, the objective bond between a being and its proper end. Obligation is not imposed from outside by tyrants. It arises from within by nature. A father owes his children guidance not because a court commands it, but because fatherhood means something. A worker owes his employer labor not because a contract compels it, but because a wage implies it. These are not social constructs. They are ontological structures. Natural law provides us with the coordinate system. Truth, the mind's conformity to reality, is the x-axis. Goodness, the will's conformity to proper ends, is the y-axis. Order, the proportionate arrangement of parts to their purpose, is the z-axis. Every act, every claim, every institution occupies a point in this moral space. Those near the origin, where truth, goodness, and order converge, are healthy. Those far from it are diseased. Those that move away from it along a deliberate vector are not merely mistaken. They are inverted. The inversion vectors. An inversion is not an error. An error is a miss. An inversion is a reversal, a 180-degree turn that points the soul or the city directly away from its proper end. Each inversion in the fable operates as a vector, a force with direction and magnitude, pushing the moral subject away from the origin point of natural law. Vector I, the rope, as oppression. Direction away from duty toward entitlement magnitude 9/10. Here is the foundational lie, the keystone inversion upon which the others rest. Grammar, a rope, is a tether. It connects, it secures. It transmits force between 2 points that must remain in relationship. An oppression is an unjust imposition, a force that serves the imposer at the expense of the imposed. These are not the same word.
They do not describe the same object. Winona's genius and her evil was to make the crowd conflate them. Logic. The argument runs. The rope pulls. Pulling causes strain. Strain is suffering.
Therefore, the rope is oppression. This fails on every logical test. It confuses necessary friction with unjust force. It assumes that because a thing causes effort, it causes harm. By this logic, gravity is oppressive. Eating is oppressive. Living is oppressive. The syllogism abolishes the distinction between the cost of existence and the cruelty of injustice. And once that distinction falls, every burden becomes a crime and every bearer becomes a victim.
Rhetoric. Winona does not argue. She performs. She tilts her head. She uses the practiced sorrow of someone who has never missed a meal.
She weaponizes sympathy. The audience feels sorry for Ardos, and from that feeling they conclude he is wronged. Feeling explains the claim, it cannot validate it. Damage. This inversion dissolves obligation at every level. If duty is oppression, then fatherhood is a prison. If marriage is a shackle, then covenant is coercion. If law is violence, then order is tyranny. The city loses the grammar of commitment. Words like duty, honor, loyalty, and sacrifice become suspect, not because they have failed, but because they have been redefined as tools of the strong against the weak. Sex swap test. When a man owes child support, the state calls it obligation. When a man owes his children presence, authority, and moral formation, the culture calls it control. The rope of maternal duty, rarely named. The rope of paternal duty, constantly litigated. Virtue remedy, prudence, the practical wisdom to distinguish necessary constraint from unjust imposition. Prudence says not all weight is cruelty. Not all freedom is liberation. Vector 2, strength as bullying, direction. Away from competence toward mediocrity magnitude, 8/10 Ardos carried the grain because he was the only man strong enough. His strength was not a weapon, it was a gift, a capacity he deployed in service of those who lacked it. This is the natural order. The strong bear more because they can. Strength is the precondition of stewardship. Grammar. Strength is the capacity to exert force toward an end. Bullying is the unjust use of force to dominate. These are categorically distinct. A man who carries grain is not bullying the grain. A father who disciplines his son is not bullying his son, unless the discipline is unjust. And then it is not discipline but cruelty, and the problem is cruelty, not strength itself.
Logic. Winona's argument. Ardos is strong. The weak feel intimidated by strength. Therefore, strength is intimidation. This is the logic of the resentful. It pathologizes capacity.
It converts ability into aggression by the mere fact of disparity. The hidden premise, equality of outcome, is the default state of justice, and any deviation is violence. This premise is self-refuting. If equality of capacity is the natural state, then no one would need to be made equal. The entire project of redistribution assumes what it claims to prove, that the strong have taken from the weak. But Ardos did not take strength from anyone. He developed it through labor, the same labor that feeds the city. Rhetoric. The word intimidating is a thought-terminating cliché. It ends inquiry. Once someone declares they feel intimidated, the burden of proof shifts. The strong man must now prove his strength is not threatening, which is impossible, because strength is definitionally capable of threatening. And capability is now conflated with intent, damage. This inversion drives the competent into hiding. When strength is treated as sin, the strong learn to apologize for their abilities, or worse, to attenuate them. They carry less, they aim lower, they withdraw. The city loses its bearers. The grain rots not because there are no strong men, but because the strong men have been taught that their strength is a moral defect. Virtue remedy, justice, giving each their due based on contribution and capacity. Justice says the strong owe their strength to service, and the weak owe their gratitude to the strong. Both are bound, both are obligated. The rope runs both ways. Vector 3, feeling as fact, direction, away from reality toward narrative magnitude. 7/10, if the weak feel bound, they are bound.
This is Winona's epistemological revolution, and it is the engine of every subsequent distortion. Grammar. A feeling is a subjective internal state, real to the one who feels it, but not about anything until interpreted.
A fact is a state of affairs that obtains regardless of observation. These are not the same category. A feeling can correspond to a fact. I feel cold, it is cold, or fail to correspond, I feel cold, it is 90 degrees. The feeling is data, it is not verdict. Logic. The argument, I feel oppressed, therefore I am oppressed. This is a non sequitur dressed as a revelation. It collapses the distinction between experience and reality, between the map and the territory. Once this collapse is accepted, every claim becomes unfalsifiable. If feeling defines fact, then no evidence can refute a felt truth, because the feeling is the truth. This is the structure of what might be called epistemological subjectivism, the proposition that the individual's emotional state has constitutive authority over external reality. It is self-refuting in practice, because if each person's feelings constitute their own reality, then contradictory feelings constitute contradictory realities, and no reality is shared, which means no argument, no law. No city, no rope is possible. The position abolishes the conditions of its own utterance. Rhetoric, my truth. Lived experience, I feel unsafe. These phrases are not arguments. They are shields, rhetorical devices designed to place the speaker beyond challenge. To question a felt truth is to invalidate the speaker, and invalidation is reclassified as violence. The circle closes. Feeling claims authority. Authority forbids questioning. Questioning becomes harm. Harm demands punishment. Damage. This inversion replaces evidence with narrative, measurement with testimony, and due process with accusation. It is the pipeline from the domestic to the legal, from the home where her feeling becomes household law, to the family court where her fear becomes a restraining order, to the HR office where her discomfort becomes a termination. Feeling does not merely explain a claim. In this system, it is the claim, the evidence, and the verdict. Virtue remedy, truth, the courage to accept reality regardless of comfort. Truth says your feeling is real, your interpretation may be wrong. We must examine both. Vector IV, exemption as reward. Direction. Away from merit, toward identity magnitude. 8/10, the grand unbinding ceremony did not reward the strong for carrying. It rewarded the weak for being weak. The moral economy was inverted. Burden became sin, relief became right. Grammar, an exemption is a release from a duty that would otherwise apply. A reward is a good given in recognition of merit. To treat exemption as reward is to treat the absence of duty as a positive achievement. But doing nothing is not an achievement. Being unable is not a virtue. These are categories that must not be blurred. Logic, the argument, the weak suffer. Suffering is bad, therefore the weak deserve relief. Therefore relief is their right. Therefore anyone who does not provide relief is unjust. Notice the slide. From compassion, a virtue, to entitlement, a demand. From mercy, a gift, to justice, a claim. The weak are not offered exemption. They are granted it as something owed. And once it is owed, the strong are not generous. They are merely paying a debt. Gratitude vanishes. Resentment remains. This is the hidden engine of responsibility laundering. Structural blame deletes individual agency. If the weak are weak because of systemic injustice, the rope, the patriarchy, the strong, then their weakness is not their fault and their exemption is not a gift but reparations. The strong man's burden becomes his penance. Rhetoric, equality, equity, inclusion. These words sound noble because they gesture toward a real good fairness. But they are deployed to mean something else. The equalization of outcome regardless of input. The exemption from standard based on identity, the inclusion of everyone except those who built the room. The rhetoric conceals the extraction damage. This inversion destroys the incentive structure of civilization. If weakness is rewarded and strength is taxed, then weakness will multiply and strength will diminish. Men who see that effort is punished and excuses are praised will stop exerting. Why carry the grain when carrying is called oppression and setting it down is called liberation? The city starves not from famine, but from disincentive. Virtue remedy, temperance, the mastery of desire over the demand for ease. Temperance says, you may deserve help, you do not deserve exemption. The first is mercy.
The second is theft. Vector V, the crowd as oracle direction, away from knowledge toward consensus magnitude. 6/10 Winona's authority did not come from expertise. She had never carried grain, she had never docked a ship.
She had never governed a city. Her authority came from the applause, the visceral, emotional, fatigued roar of a crowd that had been taught its suffering was injustice and its resentment was righteousness. Grammar. A crowd is a gathering of persons. An oracle is a source of authoritative knowledge. These are not the same. A crowd can be wise if composed of the informed and virtuous, or foolish if composed of the resentful and ignorant. Quantity does not determine quality. The number of voices does not establish the truth of the claim. Logic. The argument. Many people believe X, therefore X is true. This is the appeal to consensus, a fallacy so ancient it was identified by name before the birth of Christ. It fails because truth is not democratic. Reality does not hold elections. A rope either holds or it does not, regardless of how many people vote that it should be called a shackle. Rhetoric. The amplifiers of discourse, the media, the academy, the social platforms do not report consensus. They manufacture it. They amplify certain voices and silence others, then point to the resulting noise as evidence of public will. The crowd becomes both the product and the proof, a circular system in which the medium generates the message, and the message generates the mandate. Damage. This inversion transfers authority from the competent to the loud. The expert, the man who has spent 20 years carrying grain, is shouted down by the activist who has spent 20 minutes performing concern. The city's decisions are made not by those who understand the ropes, but by those who can summon the most decibels. Policy follows noise, law follows sentiment. Reality follows nothing, because reality has been demoted. Virtue remedy, wisdom, the discernment of truth from the noise of the multitude. Wisdom says the many are not the wise. Popularity is not a proxy for correctness. Count the votes after you examine the arguments. Vector Vix, drift as freedom. Direction away from direction toward chaos magnitude. 10/10. This is the culmination, the final inversion, the one that takes every preceding era and distills it into a single civilizational poison. Grammar. Freedom is the capacity to choose and act according to one's nature and proper end. Drift is the state of being moved by external forces without resistance, direction, or choice. These are opposites. Freedom is active. It requires will, effort, and constraint. You must choose against alternatives, which means you are constrained by the logic of choice. Drift is passive. It requires nothing, resists nothing, achieves nothing. Logic, the argument. Freedom is the absence of constraint. The rope constrains, therefore cutting the rope produces freedom. This is the logic of the suicidal. It equates freedom with void, with the absence of all structure, all direction, all connection. But a man floating in the void is not free. He is helpless. He cannot move because he has nothing to push against. He cannot choose because he has no framework of value. He cannot act because action requires a medium, and the void provides none. True freedom requires constraint in the same way that music requires scale. A note is not free because it ignores the key. A ship is not free because it abandons the harbor. A man is not free because he rejects every rope. He is lost. This inversion is magnitude 10 because it is total. It does not merely distort one virtue or corrupt one institution. It redefines the telos of human existence. If drift is freedom, then every rope is a prison. Fatherhood, marriage, law, truth, God, nature itself. Every connection becomes a chain, every duty becomes a sentence. The end logic is not liberation, but dissolution. The individual adrift, the family dissolved, the city scattered, the harbor empty. Rhetoric, freedom from this phrase, freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom from judgment, freedom from constraint, is the great linguistic trick. It defines liberty by what it escapes, not what it pursues. But a freedom defined purely by escape is a freedom with no content. It is the freedom of the castaway, not the captain. It is the freedom of the man who has burned every bridge, and now stands on a barren shore, congratulating himself on the absence of tolls. Damage. This is the inversion that sinks the ships. It is the end state of every ideology that begins with compassion and ends in collapse. When freedom is redefined as drift, the city does not merely lose its ropes. It loses the concept of ropes. It loses the memory that tethers ever existed or why they mattered. The population becomes orphans of meaning, floating, colliding, sinking, free. Virtue remedy, fortitude, the strength to hold one's ground against the current. Fortitude says, freedom is not the absence of the rope, it is the strength to hold it. Magnitude as a measure of evil. The magnitudes assigned 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are not arbitrary. They represent distance from the origin point of natural law and, correspondingly, the civilizational destructive potential of each inversion. Magnitude 6, crowd as oracle. Serious but recoverable. Crowds can be corrected by evidence, catastrophe, or leadership. The crowd is wrong, but the crowd can learn. The error is epistemic, not ontological. It confuses how we know with what is true. It is the easiest inversion to treat because it requires only better information, provided someone is still permitted to speak it. Magnitude 7, feeling as fact, dangerous. This inversion attacks epistemology itself. Once feeling replaces evidence as the standard of truth, correction becomes impossible because correction requires a standard outside the feeling, and the inversion denies that such a standard exists. The immune system of reason is disabled. Every subsequent lie enters the bloodstream without resistance. Magnitude 8, strength as bullying, exemption as reward, severe. These twin inversions attack justice, the moral economy of civilization. They reverse the incentive structure. They punish the virtues that sustain the city and reward the vices that drain it. A civilization that calls strength sinful and weakness virtuous has not merely made an error, it has declared war on its own foundation. It is metabolizing its own bones. Magnitude 9, rope as oppression, critical. This inversion attacks obligation itself, the concept that binds beings to their ends, persons to their duties, words to their meanings. If obligation is oppression, then every structure of civilization, marriage, fatherhood, contract, law, worship is reclassified as violence. The city does not merely lose its ropes, it loses the vocabulary of ropes. It cannot rebuild what it can no longer name. Magnitude 10, drift as freedom, terminal. This inversion attacks the telos of human existence. It redefines the good as the absence of all structure, the true as the absence of all claim, the beautiful as the absence of all form. It is the final rebellion, not against this rope or that duty, but against meaning itself. A civilization that reaches this magnitude does not decline. It dissolves. The progression matters. The vectors do not operate in isolation. They reinforce one another in a chain. Redefinition, grammar enables contradiction, logic, which enables persuasion, rhetoric, which enables policy, coercion, which enables the state, which enforces the new grammar upon the next generation. The cycle tightens. Each iteration makes recovery harder, because each iteration erases more of the vocabulary needed to diagnose the disease. This is why magnitude is not merely a measure of error, but a measure of evil, understood classically as privation of good. The greater the distance from natural law, the greater the privation. The greater the privation, the greater the suffering that follows, not as punishment, but as consequence. The rope does not punish the ship for drifting, the sea does. Virtues that bring the soul back to order. Each inversion has a remedy. Each remedy is a virtue, a habit of soul that aligns the person with reality and restores the capacity for right action. These are not abstractions. They are technologies tested across millennia, refined by the sharpest minds of the Western canon, and available to any man willing to practice them. Prudence, the remedy for rope as oppression. Prudence is the virtue of right practical judgment, the capacity to see what is actually happening, distinguish it from what is claimed to be happening, and act accordingly. It is the ability to say this rope chafes but it holds the ship. That rope is frayed and should be replaced. But replacement is not abolition. Prudence requires the discipline of definition. Before you can judge a constraint, you must know what it is. Is it necessary or arbitrary? Does it serve the proper end of the thing constrained? A father's authority over his children is necessary. It serves their formation. A bureaucrat's authority over a father is arbitrary. It serves the bureaucrat. Prudence distinguishes the two.
Winona could not, or would not, for men, train prudence by asking of every obligation, what end does this serve? Is the end legitimate? Is the constraint proportionate? If yes, bear it. If no, replace it.
But never abolish a rope before you understand what it holds. Justice. The remedy for strength as bullying. Justice is the virtue of rendering to each what is due, and what is due is determined by contribution and capacity, not by need alone. The strong man deserves honor because he carries what others cannot. The weak man deserves help because he lacks what others have. Both are owed. Both are obligated. The rope runs both ways. Justice forbids two errors. The error of the strong man who uses his strength to dominate might makes right, and the error of the weak man who uses his weakness to extract need makes right. Both reduce persons to functions, the strong to a beast of burden, the weak to a black hole of demand. Justice sees persons. It gives each their due. It binds both to the rope. For men train justice by asking, what do I owe? What am I owed? Am I giving what I should? Am I accepting what I should not? Reject the frame that says your strength is a debt and your service a sin. Truth. The remedy for feeling is fact. Truth is the virtue of conforming the mind to reality, of accepting what is regardless of whether it comforts. It is the discipline of saying, my feeling is real. My interpretation may be wrong. I must examine both. Truth requires the courage to distinguish, to separate the experience, I feel afraid, from the claim, I am in danger, from the evidence, is there a threat? From the verdict, what should be done? Each step requires a different faculty. Feeling provides the first datum. It does not provide the final judgment. For men, train truth by refusing to accept emotional claims as unchallengeable verdicts. When someone says, I feel unsafe, respond with compassion for the feeling and inquiry into the facts. The feeling deserves acknowledgement. It does not deserve jurisdiction. Temperance. The remedy for exemption as reward. Temperance is the virtue of mastering desire, of refusing to let appetite dictate action. It is the capacity to say, I want relief. I do not deserve it as a right. I may ask for it. I may receive it as a gift. I may not demand it as justice. Temperance is the antidote to the culture of complaint, the culture that converts every discomfort into an indictment and every inconvenience into a cause. It says, life is hard. Hardness is not injustice. Carry what you can. Ask for help when you must. But do not mistake your weakness for a moral claim on the strength of others. For men, train temperance by carrying weights you do not have to carry: physical, intellectual, moral. Build capacity. Resist the seduction of the grievance narrative, which offers the sweetness of exemption at the cost of your agency. Wisdom, the remedy for crowd as oracle. Wisdom is the virtue of right judgment about the highest things, the capacity to discern truth from noise, signal from applause, knowledge from consensus. It is the refusal to let volume substitute for validity. Wisdom is rare because it requires solitude. The crowd does not produce wisdom, it produces conformity. Wisdom comes from the individual mind, disciplined by study, tested by experience, and accountable to reality. The wise man may stand with the crowd, but he does not derive his position from the crowd. He derives it from evidence, reason, and the accumulated testimony of the past. For men, train wisdom by reading what the crowd does not read, thinking what the crowd does not think, and speaking when the crowd demands silence. Wisdom is forged in the gap between what is popular and what is true. Live in that gap. Fortitude. The remedy for drift as freedom. Fortitude is the virtue of standing firm, of holding one's ground against external pressure, internal fear, and the seductive current of the age. It is the strength to hold the rope when every voice tells you to cut it. Fortitude is the highest remedy because it addresses the highest inversion. Drift as freedom is the final temptation, the temptation to release every burden, sever every bond, and float free of all responsibility. It feels like liberation, it is annihilation. Fortitude says, I will not drift. I will choose my anchor. I will hold my post. I will bear the weight, and if the storm comes, I will be found holding. For men, train fortitude by keeping commitments when keeping them costs you. By staying when leaving is easier. By speaking when silence is safer. By carrying when setting down is celebrated. Fortitude is not the absence of fear. It is the mastery of fear through the decision to hold.
The practical moral for men. The ropeless republic is not a fantasy. It is a diagnosis. Every rope Winona cut has a real-world counterpart, the rope of fatherhood redefined as patriarchal control.
The rope of marriage redefined as romantic captivity. The rope of male competence redefined as toxic masculinity. The rope of due process redefined as protection for abusers. The rope of truth redefined as the tool of the powerful. The rope of natural law redefined as superstition. Each is being cut by the same shears, the shears of redefinition, wielded by those who have never carried the weight, amplified by institutions that profit from the cutting, and applauded by crowds that have been taught their fatigue is injustice. The practical moral is this: you cannot fight shears with arguments alone. You must fight the grammar that makes the shears seem compassionate. You must fight the logic that makes the cutting seem just. You must fight the rhetoric that makes the drift seem free. This means 4 things. First, define terms relentlessly. Do not let anyone call a rope a shackle without challenge. Do not let anyone call strength bullying without evidence. Do not let anyone call feeling fact without scrutiny. The battle begins at the dictionary. If you lose the definition, you lose the argument because the argument will be conducted in the opponent's language. Second, hold the rope. The city is not rebuilt by those who complain about the cutting. It is rebuilt by those who tie new knots, marry, father your children, build businesses, form brotherhoods, create institutions that honor strength, reward merit, enforce reciprocity, and speak truth. The ropes you hold are the ropes the next generation will inherit. Third, reject the ideology of exemption. Do not accept the frame that your effort is oppression and your success is theft. Do not apologize for competence. Do not attenuate your strength to comfort the insecure. Carry the grain. Let the calluses form. The city needs men who carry, not men who perform the aesthetics of carrying while demanding exemption from the weight. Fourth, remember that freedom is mastery, not absence. The man who cuts every rope is not free. He is gone. True freedom is the capacity to choose your tether, to bind yourself willingly to the duties, relationships, and truths that constitute a meaningful life. The free man is not the one without ropes.
He is the one who knows which ropes to hold and holds them with his whole hand. The ropeless republic ends with Winona setting down the shears and picking up the rope. She bleeds. She holds on.
This is the image of repentance, the turning of the soul from inversion back toward logos. It is available to anyone at any magnitude, at any distance from the origin. The rope is always there. The harbor is always there.
The anchor holds. But do not wait for the Winonas of the world to repent. The city cannot afford it. The grain is rotting. The ships are drifting. The children are wandering. Pick up the rope. Virtue guidelines.
Respect the rope. Constraints are not enemies. They are the structure of civilization. Honor the strong. Strength is a gift to the weak, not a threat. The strong should be thanked, not taxed into submission. Embrace the burden. Freedom is not the absence of weight, but the choice of what weight to carry. Reject the crowd. Truth is not determined by applause. The many are often wrong, the wise are few. Restore the anchor. Purpose requires a tether. Without a goal, we drift. Without a duty, we decay. Moral. When you cut the rope to free the ship, you do not liberate it. You condemn it to the storm. True freedom is not the absence of constraint, but the mastery of it. I have walked you through the parable of the ropeless republic because every civilization now standing is busily sharpening the shears. We watched Dr.
Winona cut the tether and call it mercy. Watch the crowd cheer its own untethering. watched the ships collide in the dark, while she smiled from her pedestal, too small to be swept away.
Too blind to know she was already drowning. This is not fiction. This is the family court that converts a father's love into a risk assessment. This is the HR department that converts a man's competence into a liability. This is the therapist's office where a woman's feelings receive a diagnostic code and a man's receipt of those feelings receives a behavioral label. The rope was never the enemy. The rope was the thing that kept the harbor intact. Natural law does not negotiate. It does not care about your testimony, your trauma narrative, or your lived experience. It states, with the indifference of gravity, that power requires responsibility, that liberty requires discipline, and that a civilization which severs the connection between duty and reward has sawed through its own floor. Every great tradition, the Aristotelian mean, the Thomistic hierarchy, the Roman paterfamilias, the Benedictine rule, understood that constraint is not the opposite of freedom, but its architecture. A bridge is not free because it has no supports. A bridge is a bridge because it has supports. Remove them, and you do not get a freer bridge, you get rubble in the river. Here is your one virtue, and I want you to practice it today, not next week, not after you have finished processing your feelings about it. The virtue is prudence, the disciplined recognition that boundaries are not betrayals of love, but the precondition of it today. Hold one rope you are tempted to cut. Say the thing you are afraid will cause conflict, and say it calmly with evidence without apology for the act of speaking. Refuse to absorb a false accusation simply because resisting it will make someone uncomfortable. Document the conversation, hold your frame. Do not explain past the point of comprehension. Do not apologize for a crime you did not commit. The crowd will call you rigid. Let them. The untethered always call the anchored controlling, because the sight of a man who will not drift reminds them that they have chosen to. The boy who said the emperor had no clothes did not win a debate. He simply refused to participate in the lie. The rope is still in your hands. The storm is already here. Tie the knot. Sponsored book. The Power Paradigm. Men are not born to apologize. I learned this lesson at age 12, watching my father lose his factory job to a machine that didn't unionize, complain, or demand sensitivity training. He drank, the machine didn't. That steel claw outworked him, outlasted him, and rewired my understanding of power before I could shave. 30 years later, as a strategist advising Fortune 500 boards and special forces units, I've seen the same pattern. Civilizations fall when men confuse strength with cruelty and vulnerability with virtue. This book is a blood-stained map through the wreckage of that lie. If you're reading this, you already sense the rot. You've been told to open up while women swipe left on soft-handed poets. You watch politicians send other men's sons to die for oil fields, then lecture you about carbon footprints. You notice birth rates crater as TikTok therapists pathologize fatherhood. This isn't coincidence, it's warfare. The chapters ahead dissect 12 battlegrounds where power shifts from fists to fuel rods to algorithms, exposing why male suicide spiked 60% since 2010. Hint. It's not antidepressants, and how Elon Musk's feud with big oil mirrors Genghis Khan's horse raids. Soft men will hate this book. Feminized academics will call it dangerous. Good. Their panic proves we're over the target. If you'd rather debate pronouns than learn why 73% of Fortune 500 CEOs are introverts who've weaponized silence, close this cover now. Go knit a sweater. For the rest, the builders, the fighters, the quiet strategists, this is your field manual. You'll learn why physical dominance still rules NFL, combines, and special forces selection, why oil wars are just ape chest-thumping with drones, and how to exploit AI's rise instead of becoming its pet. I've bunkered with billionaires who control more wealth than nations and drunk with mercenaries who stabilize failing states. Both groups understand the same truth. Power never disappears. It just changes hands. The brawn-to-brain ratio theory I'll unpack explains why societies crumble when desk jockeys dismiss bricklayers. My energy Darwinism framework reveals why fracking broke OPEC's spine. And the Prometheus complex detailing Oppenheimer's nukes to Zuckerberg's legless avatars shows how men either master technology or get neutered by it. This isn't self-help, it's a survival kit. You'll finish these pages knowing why female mating strategies secretly steer Bitcoin prices, how to dodge the double-bind dominance trap feminists set, and whether merging with AI will make you a god or a fossil. The data's here: Harvard studies on trader testosterone, Credit Suisse's wealth charts, Tinder's hypergamy stats. The anecdotes cut deep. Hemingway's suicide after being labeled toxic, Chernobyl's hubris, Soros breaking the Bank of England. To the men still willing to lead, your ancestors built empires with spears and discipline. You'll need code and cold rationality. The road's brutal, but the alternative, a world where boys outsource ambition to chatbots and governments confiscate sperm, deserves contempt, not compliance. Time to choose. The Power Paradigm, written by Conrad Reicher. Buy now. Links in description.